This is 3000 NFL Mock Draft, the weekly NFL Draft podcast where myself, Kenneth Arthur, and Rob Staten of SeahawksDraftBlog.com talk about the draft and the Seahawks and college football, all of which sort of revolves today around the Senior Bowl. It's really the first major step in the process leading up to the draft, and this being the 2016 NFL Draft. The Senior Bowl is this weekend, so as we sit here on Wednesday, Senior Bowl practices are going on, and really the practices probably hold more weight than the game itself. Rob, as someone who undoubtedly is following every step of the way, what are some of the things that have stood out to you so far this week in terms of the Senior Bowl practices?
Well, the one thing about the Senior Bowl practices, and you're right, they're always better during the week with the practices. Than you learn so much more now than you do in the game, which is this weekend. And it's always a great platform for offensive and defensive linemen to go and impress. So this is their opportunity to shine. It's harder for the quarterbacks or the receivers or the cornerbacks to really stand out. So what you generally find, if anybody's kind of following the Senior Bowl on Twitter, is that nearly everything is about this offensive lineman's just done this, or this defensive lineman's had a great play and made this guy look a little embarrassed. So it's all about defensive and offensive lines. Over the years, we've seen guys really boost their stock as a consequence of playing well at the Senior Bowl. Eric Fisher, Luke Jokel, and Lane Johnson, if you remember that draft, when they were three of the top four picks, they all really sort of excelled at the Senior Bowl and propelled themselves into position to go in the top five. So if you're an athletic offensive lineman, and Jason Spriggs at Indiana's making a bit of a wave at the moment, not surprising because he's tall, he's athletic, he's a former basketball guy, former tight end. It's kind of made for somebody like that to play well. And then there's other guys as well. I mean, one of the players that's getting a lot of buzz is Sheldon Rankins, who is a defensive tackle at Louisville. Now, if you watch his tape, it's pretty middling and average. I mean, he doesn't burst into the backfield. He doesn't have a lot of sacks, doesn't have a lot of splash plays, but he has got quick feet. So you put him in a sort of 1v1 matchup against maybe a slightly overmatched defensive lineman, and he's going to look great. He can pull a spin move, he can burst into the backfield, he can look really good, and he ends up getting sort of propelled into this top 20 player by everybody who's watching the Senior Bowl. And yet when you watch the tape, you don't actually see that player playing, and it's a lot harder to sort of recreate that in a game scenario. So there's two things really, is that, this is an opportunity for those guys to impress, but also make sure that if you hear good things about a player, that you go on to Draft Breakdown and you go and watch the games for yourself and then judge those more so than anything that happens this week, because there is an opportunity for players to look a little better than they actually are.
This is an unusual time to do this, but I did realize that I forgot to play the theme song, and the theme song is amazing, and I don't have the time today to place it in post. Plus B, I really wanted to credit the person that made the theme song. So Rob, I'm sure that you won't mind if I play that right now.
Oh, absolutely, go for it.
3000 NFL Mock Draft.
3000 NFL Mock Draft.
With your friends Kenneth and Rob. Talking about the NFL and the draft and the Seahawks. 3000 NFL Mock Draft. 3000 NFL Mock Draft.
So yeah, that is our excellent theme song, and I did want it. Oh, that's the other one. That's the Reel and the Field Goals one. But thank you to Soren Raven, who is at Soren, Soren, Raven, just RAVN 86 on Twitter. So thank you. Personal shout out and thanks. And I know Rob thanks you as well. He loves it. Perhaps even more.
I love hearing that. It puts me in the mood for, talking some draft every time I hear that song. And yeah, I'm going to be humming that on my way into work at 5 o'clock in the morning tomorrow. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And back to the Senior Bowl. One of the guys that I've heard a lot about, I think, for this week, and a guy that I think is standing out is Vernon Butler, the defensive tackle at Louisiana Tech. What do you know about him?
Vernon Butler is a very interesting prospect. And the one thing that the Seahawks look for, and we know this by now, are players with unique physical traits. So it doesn't have to be sort of one particular thing that is unique about a player. It can be very different things. And with Vernon Butler, it's the fact that he has 34-inch arms, which is very long. He's quite tall. He's about 6'4". He's 325 pounds, and he carries the weight brilliantly. I mean, you could see a 325-pound guy. I'm guessing that Sebastian Tretola, the Arkansas guard, is probably in that range. And he looks incredibly sloppy and a little bit flabby. And then you get Vernon Butler, 325 pounds, and he just looks like a machine. So when you actually look at that, there aren't many guys with that kind of length and height and size. You know, Muhammad Wilkerson is one of the players that sort of combines all of that, and look what he's done in the NFL. So that's interesting there. I mean, he holds his gap discipline superbly. You know, in terms of like the way the Seahawks set up their defensive line, if you notice, there was a guy in the preseason, I think his name was T.Y. McGill, and he ended up getting cut by the Seahawks, and I think he ended up in Indianapolis. And despite the fact that in every preseason game he was sort of having a sack or a splash play or getting into the backfield, Pete Carroll was saying in his press conferences after the games that, yeah, he looked quite good, but he didn't do this, this, and this. And the main thing the Seahawks kind of want from their defensive linemen is discipline and to do the role that you're told to do. They don't want people winging it. They don't want guys just sort of rushing the pass because instinctively that's what they want to do. If you've got a job, you've got to do it. And the one thing that Vernon Butler does very well is exactly that. I mean, if he's watching one particular gap, he'll contain, he'll bounce a run play out wide, he'll work his gap, he won't try and do too much on a given down. He's very stout against the run, as you'd expect with his size, and he has got a little bit of pass rush to him, but not enough really to sort of warrant anything like a top 20 grade. So he's an interesting player. That because he isn't much of a pass rusher, Kenny, I kind of have to wonder whether or not the Seahawks are going to go for a guy like that. Because if we're talking about improving the team based on what they did in 2015, sort of just slotting him in for Brandon Mebane, I don't think you're actually going to see, or Atama Rubin, I don't think you're going to see a tangible difference there. It might just be a continuation of what happened this year. I would have thought it'd be a little wiser to maybe re-sign Mebane and Rubin and try and find somebody else who can do something different or add to what you've already got there. So while I like Vernon Butler, and certainly he's a much more attractive proposition than some of the other defensive tackles that get talked about for the Seahawks, I'm still not entirely convinced whether he's going to be on their radar at number 26.
One thing that all men know for sure, and this is a proven fact, is that, you know, size matters. And, you know, it's what every girl has said to me that I've dated just as we broke up. She says, look, size matters. We can't see each other anymore. So that being said, the measurements at the Senior Bowl are going on. And, you know, I guess some of these things are unofficial, you know, throughout their college careers, or they're fudged the numbers, or people's sizes varies very much throughout the course of their careers. Were any of the measurements at the Senior Bowl, did any of them drastically affect your grades or how you viewed certain prospects?
I mean, you always look at the measurements, and I think arm length is a big thing for any offensive or defensive lineman. There were one or two disappointing things. Cody Whitehair, for example, he's a T-Rex, and I think his arms are something like 31 and a bit inches, which is, you know, given that he's 6'3" and over 300 pounds, you would hope that he would have, and playing left tackle, by the way, in college, you would hope that he'd have longer arms, but he's very much going to be a center with length like that. It's a bit disappointing that Noah Spence, the controversial pass rusher who left Ohio State, went to Eastern Kentucky and tried to rebuild his career there. He only has 31-inch arms, which means that he, in terms of length, that would be considerably shorter length, given he's only 6'2", than the Seahawks have ever gone after in a pass rusher. So he can have all the speed in the world. This would be a detachment from what the Seahawks have drafted in the past if they're going to take him. So it was a bit disappointing that he didn't have at least 33-inch arms like Bruce Irvin did. Short of that, I mean, there was some great length on show. I mean, LeRaven Clark, who's the left tackle at Texas Tech, I think his tape is horrendous, and I wouldn't draft him in the early rounds as a consequence of that. But he is, you know, what you would want in an ideal sort of frame for a left tackle. He's 6'6", 6'5", 6'6", and he's got, I think, some nearly 36-inch arms, which is ridiculous. So there's a lot to be had, a lot of interest to be had there. I don't think there was anybody in particular who I was sort of looking at that I've scratched off the list now as a consequence of length, but it's an important thing, and we know that the Seahawks pay a lot of attention to it, so we should as well.
Who would, when we get to the Senior Bowl and then, grades change and people's stock goes up and down, can you think of perhaps anyone in the last couple of years at the Senior Bowl whose performance, either during practice or in the game itself, whether it was good or bad, can you think of any prospects where it turned out that their Senior Bowl performance was a total mirage, someone that got blown up during this week that shouldn't have, or someone whose stock fell and another team became very lucky?
There was one case I remember. What draft? I think he was in the. Want to say the 2010 draft? Yeah, it was the 20. Of course, it was the 2010 draft because he went the pick before Earl Thomas. Brandon Graham, who was a pass rusher at Michigan, went to the Senior Bowl and was fantastic. I think he may have been the MVP in the game. And a lot of people were suggesting after that he could be an option for the Seahawks and that they would look at somebody like that. And when you actually watch the tape, I don't think he was quite as good as the Senior Bowl performance suggested. And I know that all the way up, leading up to sort of Pete Carroll's and John Schneider's first draft in Seattle, on the blog we weren't talking about Brandon Graham. I mean, I kind of felt it was a mirage that he was getting pumped up as much as he was to go as early as he did. But then ultimately he did go very early. It just wasn't to the Seahawks, it was to the Eagles. So the Eagles clearly sort of bought into what he was selling at the Senior Bowl. I mean, he wasn't a top 15 pick before the Senior Bowl, and then he went number 13 overall. If you remember, this was the pick where Philadelphia traded right up and everybody thought it was for Earl Thomas. They took Brandon Graham and then Earl Thomas was there for the Seahawks for the next pick. So it's one of the biggest mistakes that Philadelphia made there, because if they took Earl Thomas with that pick, I think they took Nate Allen instead. It was a different safety at the top of the second round. If they take Earl Thomas there, then he would never have been a Seattle Seahawk. And I think that the Seahawks were ready to trade down as soon as they knew that Philadelphia had taken him. I think they were going to trade down because they had somebody else in mind that they were going to take when he didn't get that. I've got a slight suspicion that it was the Pouncey brother that was available in that draft. Sort of Maurkice Pouncey went at number 18 and Seattle drafted at 14. So if Earl Thomas had gone, I think they would have dropped down a couple of spots and took the Pouncey brother to play on their offensive line. But, I think that Graham is a good example of somebody who hasn't played as well in the NFL as the Senior Bowl suggested he would. As for somebody in recent times that has really, really sort of shone through because of the Senior Bowl, I think that Lane Johnson is a great example of that, because Lane Johnson was always considered an athletic left tackle from Oklahoma, but it wasn't until he went to the Senior Bowl and stood out there that people were talking about him as a top 10 pick. He ended up going number 4 overall to Philadelphia. Funnily enough, it's the Eagles again. And he's been a pretty good pro so far. So I think that's an example of it really helping somebody.
It's I'm kind of curious in regards of size, and I don't know if these guys are at the Senior Bowl or not, but as far as cornerbacks go, who are some of the guys that you would say are the most Seahawky for that look at this point? I mean, we'll obviously find out a lot more after the combine, but at this point, who do you suspect is the most Seahawky type cornerback?
In the whole draft, or in terms of the Senior Bowl?
Just in the whole draft. If there is someone at the Senior Bowl, and I mean, I'm sure there could be someone, but overall, do you see any Seahawky cornerbacks?
Well, I really like William Jackson, who's at Houston, because he's 6'1", nearly 200 pounds, which is you tick that one off. There's not been an official measurement on his arms, but just to look at him, it looks like he's got plus 32-inch arms, which is kind of like the benchmark for Seahawk cornerbacks. They have to have 32-plus-inch arms, so he looks like he's got that covered. He doesn't look like he's got short arms. He's not an absolute elite speed guy, but they seem to be quite comfortable with their cornerbacks running in the 4.5s. I think he's going to at least manage that. He had some nice interceptions. He had 5 in 2015, 2 returned for touchdowns, so he's a bit of a playmaker, a bit of a ball hawk there. And, when you just watch him play, I mean, I watched him and a smaller school cornerback on the same day, and both of them are long, both of them are athletic, both of them had interceptions, and the difference between Jackson and the guy was just huge. So I came away thinking if there's kind of one cornerback in the middle rounds who the Seahawks can get, who perhaps best suits what they're all about, I think it's William Jackson from Houston.
some of the quarterbacks that are in the Senior Bowl. Obviously, this is an opportunity for Carson Wentz to, maybe solidify himself. It's interesting because I still see, apparently there's still a lot of people not listening to this podcast, which surprises me. I would expect every draft fan to be on it, but I was looking at certain threads of just, non-affiliated Seahawks, anything like that, but it was they were talking about would the Browns take a quarterback second overall, and all of the names thrown out there, were the typical, mostly Jared Goff, some people saying Carson Wentz, some people even saying Connor Cook. Some people still think that Christian Hackenberg will ultimately prove to be the most, liked quarterback in this draft. But it still seems like Paxton Lynch is, somewhere in the third or fourth or fifth most popular spot there. And do you think that you still stand by Paxton Lynch as your top quarterback in the draft right now? That's something that, do you think that Carson Wentz could move up in terms of the Senior Bowl?
No, I wouldn't expect that. And I would still say that Paxton Lynch is the best, and I think that he will go number 2 overall, and nothing has changed there. The problem with sort of the internet and the draft and the way that people respond to what happens is that he didn't play well against Auburn in his bowl game, in Memphis's bowl game. It was Paxton Lynch's worst game possibly in the last 2 years. Certainly his worst performance of the season by a long shot in 2015. And people are lingering on that and saying, he didn't play well against Auburn. And what people don't remember about that game is that Memphis's head coach had taken another job before that game and was not coaching. There was an interim coach, and the replacement coach was actually in the booth commentating on the game. So you've had a lot of unrest there. The usual game planning that would have taken place for Memphis isn't taking place. It wasn't a big bowl game. So, if they were playing in a substantial bowl, and that was the level of performance, you'd be concerned. But what you've got to remember is this was basically a preseason game for Auburn and Memphis. It was played with that kind of feel and that kind of pace. So without wanting to make too many excuses, you can hardly blame the guy for going out there and perhaps thinking the best thing for me is to not get injured in this game. And nobody for Memphis or Auburn played particularly well. It was a turgid game to watch. So if you want to judge your opinion on Paxton Lynch on that game, then feel free, but you'll be making a huge mistake when you need to consider how many Memphis quarterbacks in the last, 20 or 30 years have been able to beat Ole Miss of the SEC with Ole Miss's last 2 or 3 recruiting classes available, and is able to do it single-handedly. And then have a look how Memphis will play next. Memphis may struggle to win a game next year, Kenny. And that's because Paxton Lynch has become an NFL quarterback. I mean, he has a skill set that the NFL will salivate over, which is he is tall and he is mobile and he's accurate. He can be elusive, so he can break away from pressure and extend plays. He can make plays downfield. The game against Ole Miss, some of the third down conversions that he was making were fantastic, where he was sort of making 2 or 3 quick reads and then throwing it to the right-hand side on a sideline throw, which had to be, in a real small window to complete the pass and get it done. And he was fantastic. And if you watch him for the most of the year, that's how he was playing. Didn't turn the ball over. Was very good. And teams will look at Lynch and think, I can win with this guy. I can build an offense around this guy. I can put, if you're Hugh Jackson and you say, well, I might have Josh Gordon next year, and I've got Gary Barnidge, and I've got possibly the best left tackle in the NFL. I've got Travis Benjamin. I can actually put a structure around this guy and win quickly. And he can because of his skill set, because he's big, because he's strong, because there's a running impact there as well. He can run the ball. We can get a productive offense. So you either go with that guy, or you take Jared Goff and say, yeah, I'll take Jared Goff, but because he's a finesse passer, because he's a more technical passer, he might need 2 years to learn the playbook before we get the best out of him. Mm-hmm. That's where you've got to sort of weigh up the two things there. And I could be wrong, but I'll be surprised if the Browns don't just. I think Paxton Lynch is the best bet for them, and I think they're going to take him.
Well, let's talk about, who are the last four quarterbacks to go to the Super Bowl out of the NFC. Colin Kaepernick, Russell Wilson, and Cam Newton. It's a trend that's undeniable that if you have some athleticism and you can run the ball, that's been extremely difficult for teams to counter with. Now that we know, with the evolution of, how young black men are treated in football programs from high school to college to the NFL, it took a long time for football to catch up with the fact that they didn't have to move a guy from quarterback in high school to wide receiver because he was the most athletic guy in the field, that you could actually say, well, let's keep developing this guy as a quarterback and he can still be a threat. And I think that, after Randall Cunningham came along, it took another 15 years. Even that, you had to have Randall Cunningham and Michael Vick, and then finally, when you could get to, the Cam Newtons and Colin Kaepernicks and Russell Wilsons, that now it's like, I think you're going to see more and more college teams using the pistol and the read option, and we saw the read option with Deshaun Watson. Like, there's definitely a value in that two-way step for quarterbacks that will only probably continue. I've never heard of this guy, which I won't forget his name anytime soon, Dak Prescott out of Mississippi State. You likened him to Russell Wilson. Can you speak on that?
Well, he's very different to Russell, but I think that the one thing that he is mobile, he's a running threat, and he's kind of got some physical talent there. He's a little bit shorter than I thought he would be. Actually, I think he's sort of 6'2". I think he was measured at the Senior Bowl, but he's somebody that you could bring in as a project in the later rounds, and he could develop into a pretty good backup or somebody that you could have a shot with. Maybe he gets an opportunity at a team without an established quarterback, or the quarterback gets injured and he gets an opportunity. Just on he can run the read option. He can do all those things. Just on this point, Kenny, as we're talking about quarterbacks here, Jared Goff is sort of the big draft darling amongst people who are on Twitter, and they like him because they feel that he's the sort of more conventional passing quarterback. But the same thing happened in the 2014 draft, where people fell in love with Teddy Bridgewater, and then it was kind of like there was this huge group thing going on whereby Teddy Bridgewater was brilliant, NFL teams were stupid for passing on Teddy, and they knew that this would be a mistake ultimately. And Teddy Bridgewater has shown himself to be a pretty average player, but he went in the back end of the first round. The guy who went third overall.
Rest in peace to Pro Bowl prestige right there with Teddy Bridgewater, but continue.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But Blake Bortles went third overall, not Teddy Bridgewater. Blake Bortles went third overall. And the reason that Bortles went third overall is because he could avoid pressure, because he could throw it downfield, and he had size. And whether people want to admit it or not, whether it's right or wrong, teams want guys who are elusive in the pocket, can make every throw, can have some read option benefit, and can sort of come in quickly and start. And the feeling was Bortles could do that. And the feeling will be that Paxton Lynch can do it as well.
We can build off of what we've talked about so many times on this podcast, which is offensive linemen aren't as good as defensive linemen anymore. So when you see Tom Brady get hit more in one game than any quarterback had been all season by the Denver Broncos, I don't think it necessarily, you have, whether you get rid of the ball quickly or you can move within the pocket or outside of the pocket. We know now that quarterbacks have less time than ever to throw it. And so having a guy that can move around, unless you have that lightning quick release like Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers, those seems to be the two things. Does Jared Goff have a lightning quick release?
No, and the problem with Jared Goff is that, he has actually got some mobility. He's not a sloth in the pocket, that's for sure. But the problem with Jared Goff is that he's not a running quarterback. So he kind of like moves to extend plays. And then if you're constantly sort of going to be a passer in that situation, you're either going to take the sack eventually or you're going to run yourself into trouble and throw it up. And he had some horrible interceptions where he tried to do just a little bit too much on a broken play. And that's the problem, where someone like Paxton Lynch might get under pressure and turn what could have been an otherwise bad play into maybe a 3-yard gain. Jared Goff might turn it into an interception. And, if it's a broken play, it's a broken play. Get what you can, get on to the next one. And I think that Lynch and Carson Wentz are ultimately going to be better at that than Jared Goff is.
Moving on to a couple more. I know a lot of people are going to be asking about offensive line. They're going to be expecting offensive line in the first round for the Seahawks. Depending, and I mean, that'll change somewhat based on the statuses of Russell Okung and J.R. Sweezy, but they're also going to be wanting to know, if they don't get a guy in the first round, is there going to be someone available in the middle rounds? Alex Lewis and Fawn Cooper are two guys that you named recently, and I'm more curious perhaps about Fawn Cooper. Is this a guy that could potentially, go in day 3 and have that first round value?
I don't think he's going to have the first round value, but he is fairly limited to an extent. And the good thing about him is that when Laramie Tunsil was injured last year, he was the right tackle at Ole Miss and then moved over to the left tackle. And to give you a bit of background on this guy, he went to Bowling Green, and then after a year or two at Bowling Green, decided, I'm better. I want to play at a top program. I want to play at a big team. So he joined the JUCO ranks. Left Bowling Green, went to a JUCO team, went to a JUCO college, was brilliant there, and Ole Miss were quite happy to take him on to give him the opportunity to play for a big team. So he goes to Ole Miss. He played right tackle with across from Laramie Tunsil in his first year. And then this year, Tunsil is held out by Ole Miss because there's a fear that he's got some benefits. I think there was something to do with the car, so they held him out so they could avoid sanctions and let the process play out, which meant that Fawn Cooper played left tackle for most of the season until Tunsil came in with a few games to go. Now Cooper did a great job there, and then I put the tape of him on right tackle and thought, you look really, really good. He's really smooth. And his back pedal, he seems to be fairly good with his hands. He wasn't getting beat with speed off the edge, wasn't getting beaten at all. I think it's important to go and watch interviews with these guys to see what kind of character they have. And I really like the way that he speaks, as a student of the game, studies hard, he's a well-spoken guy. So I think that he's probably going to end up going in the sort of round 3 to 5 range. And if the Seahawks don't go offensive line early, and if they want to get a right tackle who can sort of come in and hold his own or have somebody compete with somebody else for that position, then Cooper could be an option there, because I think it's looking more and more obvious that Gary Gilliam's going to move over to the left, that Russell Okung's going to move on, and that they're going to need to fill a hole at right tackle. The big question for me now is that going to be with a first-round pick? Is it going to be with a veteran that they sign in free agency, and there's going to be a couple of options there? Or is it going to be somebody drafted later on? Because Gary Gilliam was an undrafted player. I think he was the undrafted.
Yeah.
He was seventh round.
He was a tight end, right?
Yeah. So they don't necessarily. We assume that the Seahawks offensive line now has to be made up with early picks, but it's hard to forget. It's hard to remember rather that Gilliam's an undrafted guy and he could be the left tackle next year. One of the people that a lot of Seahawks fans keep saying they want them to sign is Alex Boone in San Francisco, who was an undrafted free agent from Ohio State. Mm-hmm. So, you don't have to find these guys in the first round. You can find them later on. So,
but also, there is a certain reliability. I mean, if they lost Russell Okung, I mean, that's the one guy. Not he may have not played up to the extraordinarily high standards that everyone set him to, but Russell Okung did come in and play left tackle right away. It wasn't a situation, and if they don't in a position necessarily to wait, like they had to do with J.R. Sweezy and how they got very little help from Justin Britt, and even though they're not picking in the top 10, I mean there would be certain guys if they were there at 26 that could be there that they would have to take, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very healthy draft to need to bring in offensive linemen. The big question that I'm asking myself at the moment is which position they're going to value the most, because they're probably going to have to fill a hole at left guard, because I think they're going to feel like they've got to replace Justin Britt. There was no endorsement at all from Pete Carroll when he was asked about Britt's performance. And when you actually go back and watch the last few games, I mean, I saw someone did a tape breakdown from the all 22 perspective of Justin Britt against Carolina, and he was beat like a drum all day. So I can't see him starting at left guard. He's going to have to be replaced. they're going to have to replace at least one tackle. So whether that's they bring in a left tackle or they move Gilliam over and then bring in a right tackle. And then there's the centre position as well, which, Patrick Lewis didn't do too badly, but given that they started Drew Nowak over Patrick Lewis at the start of the year and gave Nowak every chance to win that job, it suggests that they never really saw Lewis as anything more than a stopgap. So I would be surprised. He will start next year because they were unable to bring somebody in to upgrade that position. That's really the only chance of that. So which position do they value the most? What do they see is crucial? Do they think they can get a right tackle, like Vaughn Cooper later in the draft? Do they feel like, someone like Phil Lodeholt going to be released by Minnesota? It looks very likely. He's got the size that they like. Are they going to bring him in and then maybe play him at left guard or right tackle? Or do they sort of use the first round pick to bring in a left guard because they want to sort of nail that position? But it's hard to find a left guard that you would want to take in that range. So that's the kind of thing I'm working out at the moment. I think the best value is going to be a tackle for the Seahawks in the late first. So I think that's what they'll probably do. Take a tackle in the first round and then piece this thing together as they go along. But one thing is for sure, the tackle will be tall and long. Doesn't necessarily have to have huge size, but I think that they do like that. The left guard's gonna be enormous. Think 325, 330 pounds, tall and long, because that's what they want from the left guard. And the center, I think, will be an athlete.
Well, let's talk about, the Seahawks free agency and the offensive line real quick. Russell Okung really showed his experience as an agent this week, sending out an email to every team saying that he'd be healthy, blah, blah, blah. No, you're not supposed to. You can do that, but you're not supposed to. And the teams have to inform the Seahawks, and it cuts off all talks and blah, blah, blah. It certainly appears like Russell Okung is gung-ho and set and ready to get out there on the open market. And how much would that concern you if they weren't able to keep Russell Okung and now they're sitting there with, one less offensive lineman on a group that was already pretty bad? Given the free agent market and the draft, how much would it concern you if Russell Okung is as good as gone?
I've come to terms with it. I mean, in an ideal situation where there's no salary cap, you keep Okung because he's your most experienced lineman. He was a top 10 pick. He's not a bad player. He's just not a great player. You would keep him and you would build other areas that were of a greater weakness. But I think that there's two things at play here. Because of the cap, because they're going to want to keep a lot of other players, I think that they will prioritize keeping people like Ataba Rubin, Jeremy Lane, possibly Brandon Mebane, a lot of other players as well that I think will come first, rather than giving Russell Okung $8 to $9 million. And I think that there's every chance that J.R. Sweezy will go as well. Plus, I think they will want at least some money, Kenneth, to go and bring in outside free agents. And I don't mean that they'll go out and bring in Mohammed Wilkerson or anything like that, but I think they want a bit of leeway to go and make a couple of additions, probably to the defensive line, because that is the area where they have brought in free agents in the past. They've been very clever bringing in Cliff Averill and Michael Bennett and Ataba Rubin and Tony McDaniel, Kevin Williams. Chris Clemens was a trade. They've done a very, very good job of finding options there. They pursued Jared Allen and Henry Melton. So I think that they will look at the options in the defensive line in free agency and try and bring, whether it's Olivier Vernon from Miami, whether there's maybe another couple of guys they could bring in who would do a good job there for them. It could just help the pass rush a little bit. And if they're going to do that, they need cap room, which means that Russell Okung's going to have to go and J.R. Sweezy might have to go. Then Mark Glowinski comes in at right guard. Gary Gilliam switches from the right to the left. I'm not as concerned as that by some people, because I do think that Gilliam's best aspect is working the speed rush. And that is the only reason to be concerned about anybody playing left tackle. If they can't handle the speed rush, they're gonna struggle like crazy. He handles the speed rush really, really well. What he doesn't handle is sort of a power bull rush. He needs to get his hand placement up, needs to get stronger, needs to work on his technique there. But this was his first year starting at tackle. He's a converted tight end, so there is some reason for optimism that he's going to get better there. And I also think it's a really good draft for offensive tackles. So even if you're not going to get Laramie Tunsil or Taylor Decker or Jack Conklin, there's every chance you're going to get a Sean Coleman, you're going to get a Jason Spriggs. There's one or two others as well that I would like, even at the end of the first round. So it's not a bad position to be in.
What do you think is the most important part of this process? Because as we sit here at the Senior Bowl, and all the college tape is done for, and obviously that probably holds the most weight. What did you do in college? How did you look in college? How did you do against the best competition? Not just how did you do against, mediocre competition that would never sniff the NFL. All that stuff is done. So what do you think is the most important part? Is it the combine? And if it's the combine, like, is it the 40-yard dash? What exactly post-college career do you most look forward to, or do most people put the most weight in, right or wrong?
I think the combine is fantastic. I think the combine is the best thing because you find out so much about players. You can find out who are the unique guys in a draft class. Who are the ones that have got, whether it's ridiculous length of a left tackle. And the sort of the nimble footwork and the mirror and the kick slide to go with it. Who are the guys who have got the explosive broad jump or the vertical jump that you just sort of didn't, you wouldn't expect it. I mean, you learn so much about, and there was, for a period of time, I think for about 6 or 7 years, there was a feeling, a bit of snobbery about the combine, that it was overrated, or that, it was just a glorified, Olympics in your underpants kind of thing. And I think that kind of sentiment has gone by the wayside now, as people realize that you can learn a great deal about players here. You find out every single measurement, you get every single timed run and jump, and that there is something to that. Plus, you get all the players together at the same time. So the thing about the pro days is that, I remember that Anthony Barr ran a pretty sluggish 40-yard dash at the combine. And then he went on his pro day at UCLA, which has got a notoriously fast field, and then ran 0.2 of a second faster, and everybody just ignored the combine time. And I'm like, well, why would you do that? That was him running, right after every single one of his peers ran, and you could compare them all in the same sort of conditions and say, well, this guy runs faster than this guy. Why would you ignore that to then go to the pro day because he ran on his own on a faster track outdoors? I mean, so I think that the combine is without a shadow of a doubt the most.
But Anthony Barr is pretty good too.
Yeah, I mean, he's pretty good. Yeah, but was he as fast as a 4.4? No, he's not a 4.4 guy, in my opinion.
I mean, either way, the problem with the combine, I think, is when a guy does run, a 4.3, and he's bigger than you'd normally see a 4.3, and then you look at, and he gets drafted in the first round, and you look at his college numbers, and he had 700 yards as a senior, and then there's like. Isn't that sort of an issue? I don't know how Breshad Perryman's going to do, but I mean, he was sort of a freak. I mean, Byron Jones obviously went from a day 3 pick to a first round pick because of the combine. There are some issues in terms of, and we still don't know how Byron Jones is going to do, but you can get overrated because of those numbers, can't you?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, absolutely. There's a history of players who get overrated because of that, but I think the teams know when to separate. The thing is, though, is for every guy that goes there and overachieves and then gets overdrafted as a consequence, as Darius Hayward Bay or something like that. It's usually the dumb teams that make those kind of picks. It's the dumb teams who let everybody else down. I think one of the great things about it is you go there, and Byron Jones is a good example of this. So someone turns up and runs a 4.34, and you've not watched any of their tape. And then they do a great broad jump, and then they do a great vertical, and then the day after, you're watching their tape. And then you might watch it and go, actually, no, he's not good, because I've watched this now and I understand it. Or you may actually go, hey, I would have never even imagined to look at this guy unless I watched the combine and saw he was this athletic, and it kind of piqued my interest a little bit. And then you go and watch him play. So you actually discover players that you otherwise would not have known about if it wasn't for the fact that they ran really well or jumped really well, and you actually want to go and take a look at them.
Is there anybody that you saw play this year that looked so fast on the field that you think that when they are measured, when they are timed and everything like that, might might set some records this year? Is there anyone to look out for in terms of world-breaking speed?
I think the one to keep an eye on is Will Fuller, who's the receiver at Notre Dame. Has just got incredible acceleration and just a real fluid runner, and he's small as well, so that always helps. So I think that he's the one who could really. I mean, if he ran in the 4.2s, it wouldn't be a shock. I think he's probably going to be in the 4.3s, but he's the one that I would keep an eye on the most.
And obviously someone that the Seahawks could look at. There are definitely going to be, once again, issues after we see what they do with the free agency and their offensive line and Jermaine Kearse and their wide receivers and the health of Paul Richardson and Jimmy Graham, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, it's still very early in the process, and the Senior Bowl going on Saturday. We'll come back next week with more of a look back on the whole Senior Bowl week and the game and sort of see how the stocks have changed. Hopefully the Seahawks will have, I don't know, some news comes out. It would be nice to have something to talk about. Not a whole lot of news, obviously, coming out of any towns at this point until the Super Bowl is done with. Rob, before we go, did you want to drop any Super Bowl predictions?
Yeah, there's a couple of things before we go. I mean, if people, before I give a prediction on the Super Bowl, let me just say that if you want to go and look at players who might be sort of, maybe we haven't covered before or that you think might be interesting, then go and have a look at, you can find any tape, Kyler Fackrell, who is from Utah State, who is a guy that I sort of stumbled across this week and really like. So he's an outside linebacker who's more of a pass rusher than a coverage guy, but he only had 4 sacks last year, but he could have had about 40 the way that he plays. I mean, he was just lived in the backfield, countless splash plays, impacted so many downs for Utah State. He's such a fun player to watch. So if you get a chance to go and watch Kyler Fackrell from Utah State, people want to name, then certainly go and keep an eye on him. We talked about Fawn Cooper. Go and have a look at Graham Glasgow, who is a big interior lineman from Michigan. Spent a lot of time watching this week, so go and keep an eye on him. Ronald Blair, we've talked about before, who is a potential 3-technique convert. Ronald Blair, the third from Appalachian State, another guy to go and maybe keep an eye on there. And there's going to be a lot of different players that we're talking about. Since the end of the season, I think I've pretty much done an article every single day, whether it's about the Senior Bowl or different players. So just head over to the blog, go and absorb all of that.
SeahawksDraftBlog.com.
Yeah, exactly. It's all on there, and some good conversation as well in the community as well that have been talking about the different players. As for the Super Bowl, I don't know. I was kind of disappointed, Kenny, after the. I think a few people have kind of said this, but having seen Carolina play Arizona the way that they did, I just felt so disappointed that the Seahawks couldn't have just found a way to win in Carolina, because I think they would have destroyed Arizona. And if the Seahawks were playing this Denver Broncos team in the Super Bowl, I would not have any doubt in my mind whatsoever that they would win, because yet they'd be coming up against a great defense. But I couldn't imagine Peyton Manning and that running game beating the Seahawks. So it feels to me like a real missed opportunity. I think that Carolina will win the Super Bowl, because I just can't see Peyton Manning. I can see him throwing 3 interceptions to Luke Kuechly. I can just see it now. Kuechly picking off a pick 6 or something from one of Manning's ducks. You can just see it. And when Peyton Manning gets on this stage, time and time again, he makes the mistake. So unless that defense can completely shut down Carolina, which I don't think they're capable of doing, even as good as they are, it could be a pretty one-sided game.
I mean, I think people are underestimating Denver's defense a little bit, just in terms of, I think everyone acknowledges that it's good, but I mean, I don't think a lot of people acknowledge that it's like really, really great. And I think that that's something that obviously Carolina's defense is maybe second to only theirs, but it's just, I think that they can really keep them in the game and keep it very close. And obviously, if Carolina gets out to yet another giant lead, Peyton Manning probably doesn't have what it takes to lead 2 or 3 long drives in the second half. He could probably do one, but not multiple. So, I mean, if Carolina pulls out, if Luke Kuechly does having yet another pick six. Of course, that's going to be difficult for the Broncos to overcome, but I just really see this as, being a game that Denver is more in than people realize, and I think that people overrate conference championship blowouts compared to conference championship, close games. I kept thinking about the 2000 conference championships in the Super Bowl when the Ravens won a close game and the Giants blew out the Vikings 41-0, and people thought, well, this is the great offense versus the great defense, and the Ravens just blew them out. So I'm not saying, and I think you could say that Denver's defense and Baltimore's defense may be closer than people realize. When you look at the way that the passing offenses were back in 2000 compared to now when they're just blown out of proportion, those are close. And I think obviously Peyton Manning is better than Trent Dilfer even now. So, it was just a very close game, and obviously an opportunity for, Cam Newton, if he has a Super Bowl MVP, if he puts up 4 or 5 total touchdowns, something like that, where people will be, not that they aren't already, but calling him the greatest player in the NFL. Did you ever expect, even a couple months ago, that we might be saying that Cam Newton has become the best player in the NFL? He had all of the potential and he had all of the hype, but he wasn't really playing like this. Can you believe that? And would you believe that Cam Newton is the best player in the NFL for real?
No, I don't think he is anywhere close to being the best player in the NFL. I think he's had a fantastic season. I think it'd be harsh to say that he hasn't. I think we've seen the best of Cam. I think they've put a situation around him with the running game and the way that the interior line blocks and the way that the defense plays as well. I think it's a perfect storm for them, essentially. It's all come together, and Newton has played better than he ever has before around that. I did think that there was a chance that he would be a really good player. I remember writing an article. I watched him play. I want to say it was against somebody like Nebraska or somebody like that for Auburn, and remember writing a piece about it immediately afterwards and thinking this guy could be the number 1 overall pick. And it was a long, without wanting to sort of give myself a pat on the back here, because I'll hurt myself doing that. But this was before anybody was talking about him even entering the draft the next year. And then I wrote a piece a little bit after that. I think it was after they played Georgia that year, that he could be a Kobe Bryant style player, one that would ultimately could be controversial at times and would sort of always be talked about, but could also have that sort of unique talent that could just be so good, no matter what the distractions are or whatever. He could just be so good that he would sort of drag a team on its own to playing really well. And as the season played out that year, it became more and more obvious that he was a guy who could, was just such a good player. And no one would ever say to Cam Newton, I can't imagine that Cam Newton has got a great understanding of a playbook in the way that, the top quarterbacks have, because, he just doesn't seem like, with the greatest respect to him, he doesn't seem like necessarily a student of the game. Now, not to say that he isn't a hard-working guy, but I don't get the impression that he's somebody who is up all night dreaming about coverages like a Peyton Manning would be, for example, or a Russell Wilson. He just seems to me like somebody who enjoys life, enjoys playing the game, and he's just so naturally talented that he kind of can play at such a fantastic level with the way that he operates.
Which quarterback do you start your franchise with today out of all of them?
Of all the ones that are playing today, it wouldn't be Cam. It wouldn't. I don't think you would choose. People will say Cam now because he's in the Super Bowl, but I would not choose Cam. I would choose somebody.
Yeah, Colin Kaepernick was in the Super Bowl not too long ago.
There's yeah. And who's to say? It wouldn't surprise me at all if Carolina went 9-7, 8-8 next year or whatever. And Cam was a 25 touchdown passes, 12 interceptions quarterback. It wouldn't be a surprise at all. If I was trying to build a franchise from scratch tomorrow, I would still say, I know that you've got some strong opinions on Andrew Luck, but I would say either Andrew Luck or Russell Wilson. because I just feel like both of those guys have a certain style of character that I feel that you could trust them to sort of operate and manage an offense, and that they sort of have everything, big arm mobility, efficiency, accuracy, and I think that would be the quarterback that I'd go for.
Hey, you put Andrew Luck in a competent franchise, and maybe things are different. I don't deny that, that he's definitely in an incompetent franchise with an incompetent owner and not a great GM, and they won't build up the defense and they won't make it a better team. And, he'll have to try to do too much and he throws too many interceptions. I'm just say that the way that he was playing and the value that he had wasn't as great as what people were saying or what it looked like on paper playing against the AFC South. So that's all there is with Andrew Luck. But yeah, I could totally see the idea of starting a franchise with him still. And I think that there is still a good argument to be made that Russell Wilson is the guy you build your team around. I think that I was thinking about it yesterday too, was, you've got three types of players. You've got the naturally gifted guys, you've got the obsessed studying guys, and you've got the very rare guys that are both, that have all of the natural gifts and also put in all of the mental work. And, I think the Seahawks might have the most of those guys of any team in the league, and Russell Wilson is definitely one of them. Just obsessed with being, getting better, like an Earl Thomas or a Richard Sherman, that they are just not just more gifted than you, but also just care and they try harder and they want to learn more and know more than you as well. And they're students of the game. So that's why I think, you could definitely build your team around Russell Wilson, which is, for a guy that went 75th overall in the draft, there may not be another player in the league more valuable than him right now, though Cam Newton is definitely going to get that hype. And if he beats it'll be interesting to see, what his passing numbers are going to look like against the Denver Broncos pass defense. That'll be the key to the game pretty much. Unless there's anything else, I think we're going to cut it here as it's a shorter than usual episode of 3000 NFL Mock Draft. And there's nothing much else to say. Follow on Twitter at Rob Staten and at Kenneth Arthur S. And the blogs, and subscribe to the show on iTunes if you would. And we'll be back next week to talk about more things relating to the NFL draft. Rob, final thoughts?
Yeah, and hopefully, I know that there's a few people we know who are either at the Senior Bowl. I know that Miles Killebrew said that he would come back and talk to us after the Senior Bowl, so maybe he's somebody we can talk to in the next couple of weeks. We've got some really good guests I know that we can get on. I've got a couple of ideas coming up for the next few weeks, so hopefully get some really good reaction from the Senior Bowl next week, and start to look ahead as well to the Combine, which is not too far away now.
How far away is that? February something?
Sort of like the 20s. So I want to say something like February 22nd or something. It's probably 23rd, February 23rd.
All right. Well, yeah, that's less than a month away, man. These things move quickly. So come back and listen for those guests and keep on tracking. We will talk to you next week.